All right, we start this Sunday in South Carolina by closing the book, kind of, on the $1.8 billion money mystery, or not so much mystery, and State Treasurer Curtis Loftis. We all know the Senate, 33-8, voted to remove him from office. Sent that resolution to the House. Well, this past week, the House says we're not touching it. At least not for now. That's where we begin. As we get you connected to the Capitol this week, we begin with what could be the final chapter of that story, or maybe not. So Catherine Glenn Foster and Dave Wilson will quickly talk about that. The House says they got more pressing issues to deal with for the final 3 days of the session. Curtis Loftis isn't one of them, they say. Could be revisited in the future, but maybe not.
They're out of time for this year. And so the real question is what this signals. Is this political survival or is it gridlock?
Yeah.
And what might happen over in 2026?
Yeah, we had an almost 9-hour hearing on this in the Senate. Well, and the House said, we're not even giving 9 minutes.
Well, keep in mind that 2026 is going to be an election year.
For him.
For him, for every constitutional officer, and every member of the House. So when you put those figures together, going after Curtis Loftis, who has said right here on this show that he is going to be running for office again, even after he had said he was basically done with it, he came back out and said, no, I'm going to keep going. And if you do that and you have that running up against 124 members of the House, they really don't want to touch this issue anymore. Agreed. And there are other pressing issues that need to be addressed, and let the voters decide what's actually going to happen when it comes to Curtis Loftis.
2026, and see if they want to keep him in office, and something tells me they might want to. Now, Mr. Loftis did have something to say about the House's decision. Marcus, if we could get a look at that statement that he released just the other day. This is just a snippet of it directly from the Treasurer himself. Quote, "I'm grateful for the House leadership's decision today to choose the people's business over political theater, to stabilize our state's financial system and put this unfortunate chapter of fighting baseless claims by a few politically motivated senators behind us." So Mr. Loftis sticking to his guns and adding there was never any missing money. We know that. Phantom money, that's what it'll be. That's what it will remain. It was never real. No one was sticking it in their pockets. It was just a dreadful error over a series of years.
And it goes back to what we talked about with the fact last week, the fact that if there had been an opportunity for him to have come forward, if he had taken that opportunity and come forward and say, hey, listen, there's an issue here, we need to deal with it, we probably would not have seen that stuff happening in the Senate.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. It's just like when you're a kid and you want to just go to your parents and admit you're wrong right up front instead of having them find out.
Yeah.
That's when you get in the real trouble.
Yeah.
And that's what happened to him.
Exactly.
Yep, that's what happened. Well, speaking of money, let's talk about casinos again. That's been a running theme here on the show as well. Casino gambling, been talked about quite a bit in recent weeks at the State House. Time's running out on that as well. And there's the site of where the first could be. That's the old Santee fashion outlets, or outlets, whatever you want to call them. They've been gone for a couple decades now. But that's in Orangeburg County, right off I-95. The developers say great location. A lot of people agree with them. The polling says that that's a good idea.
Well, 2 out of 3 South Carolinians right now are turning around and saying that they have an interest in the economic impact that this can have. You're looking at 4,600 jobs in a very economically depressed area of the state. You're looking at $1 billion of private investment. If you think about it from this standpoint, if you put 4,600 jobs in Orangeburg County, that is 3.5 or 1.3 times more than what the state of South Carolina has done in economic development in the last 15 years in Orangeburg County. That is a huge step forward in what needs to be done about this.
Well, the clock's ticking on that one, though, for sure.
Right.
Because it would still have to go through the Senate too.
It will not make it.
It's not going to get it.
It will not make it through the Senate this year.
Yeah, it's not going to.
But
it'll be a step.
It did make it out of the House Ways and Means Committee, got onto the floor Wednesday, was read across Wednesday afternoon. There's a 24-hour rule, which means they couldn't take it up on Thursday, but they're going to take it up on Tuesday, and I can guarantee you pretty close that bill is going to see its way through the House. If it passes, it's then going to have this entire time period for the Senate to take it up when it comes back in January.
Yeah, next year. Next year, early 26. Right. Hard to see. Man, that's hard to think about.
So soon.
2026.
Exactly.
Another one we've talked about, too, that deals with money and tax reform. Not the big income tax reform one, but boat property tax. We have the highest in the nation, not in line with our neighboring states. So people say, I'll take my damn boat and I'll put it, register it in North Carolina or Georgia or somewhere else, and they can have my money.
Right.
And less of it.
Exactly. At that recent boat show, we saw the majority of South Carolinians registering those boats out of state. So it's another opportunity for South Carolina to reclaim some of these funds, just like turning the corridor of shame into the corridor of opportunity. And we can also have waterways of opportunity. Yeah. The current version of this bill would bring that boat tax down from over 10% down to 6%, and also combine the taxes. Right now we have boats and motors, if you can believe it,
double taxed
separately, as if you take your car and you're taxed on the motor and the seat and the frame, and I know all the car parts, but you get the point.
Yeah, well, and that's the whole thing, that when you look at it from that standpoint, there are a lot of counties when people finally got their tax bill and they're realizing, I got charged over here for the hull and over here for the motor, and this just doesn't work. But the counties are pushing back on this. It is now on the House floor this coming week. It's going to be another one of those things that's going to be the quick rush through of bills these last 3 days of session. But the counties are pushing back on there, saying it's going to take away millions of dollars of taxes that go to pay for roads and schools and everything else. But the thing about it is, if you, as Catherine said a moment ago, if you can bring boats back into the state, there's a net positive that comes from that.
Yeah.
Just like, Walmart adjusting their prices, rolling back prices, same idea. You can roll back the prices and have a lot more sales.
Right, and that I think is going to be the place where if we see that go through, you're going to see those boats coming back into South Carolina and the taxes being paid on them too. But you've got a prime example. There was a person who was from Colleton County. She talked about buying a boat. The boat taxes were more than her home taxes. And that's a big tax on the middle income in South Carolina.
And we're not talking about a big boat here either.
No.
It was just a standard boat.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a place where you've got people who go, I can buy this thing for my family, but my gracious, I'll be taxed out the wazoo on this one.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's just the beginning this week. As we get connected to the Capitol, we're also going to be talking again about liquor liability reform. We've got a business owner in here this week. We've heard from the policymakers. We're going to hear from the boots on the ground this time and the real impact it's having on them and potentially employees if they can't keep the doors open and a lot of other things.
Yeah.
Another, locally owned businesses that could potentially shut down. And also, very critical issue in the state, domestic abuse.
Yes.
And there's a measure right now that a senator has introduced that could really make a difference in keeping people safer and keeping them out of some dangerous situations. So we're going to continue now and get you connected to the Capitol this week. Well, it is the issue that will not go away. Liquor liability reform in South Carolina. We talk about it seemingly every single week on this program, and that's because it's stuck in limbo. Two different plans that address this issue, one in the House, one in the Senate. House passed theirs with no problem. Well, we couldn't say the same for the Senate.
The Senate lasted 4 weeks.
It lasted 4
or
weeks.
More.
And House has lasted about 4 hours. That brings us, though, to the fact that there's just a few more days in the legislative session to get an issue handled that affects thousands and thousands of businesses in this state and their ability to maybe keep the doors open, because we know thousands have closed in the last half decade or so. So, we've heard from the policymakers. Today, we're going to hear from somebody that this actually affects right here on the ground. We've invited Chris Fitz, the owner of The Hollow in the Vista. Just celebrated your first anniversary.
Thank you. Yes,
So
sir.
you got into these murky waters in the last year. This is something that maybe as a restaurant owner, you probably didn't think you'd have to keep an eyeball on the State House as closely as you probably are right now.
Absolutely. And I think it's become a day-to-day issue for us, is really where we look at it. And, the more conversations we have around town, it's affecting all of our friends in the community as well, And that's just not restaurant owners, that's restaurant workers, that's everybody affected with your favorite place down the street. And we need to see some relief soon, is really what we're looking for.
We've seen more than 5,000 businesses close, restaurants and bars close over this period of the last several years. When you look at it from an owner's position, What is it that you're having to deal with? I mean, these are extremely high costs to be able to stand up under $1 million a year policy for your restaurant.
It's something that we can't ignore, but we also need to be really active with, is that every single day we're going to be affected by, are we making the right decision behind the bar? Are we making the right decision with the business? And where we want to go forward is looking out for our customers at the top of the list, but then also for our employees as well, And every bit of the liquor liability in South Carolina right now handcuffs us. And it puts a strain on our business, not only financially, but mentally for our staff and things like that as well. And we need to see some changes.
When you think about that from an early business starting up, you've got a year under your belt now, but you're having to spend tens of thousands of dollars every single month.
Absolutely.
Just to be able to stay in business. What do you say to legislators then when you are looking at the bills coming in and the dollars going out, and how do you keep the business open? What do you say to them?
I say, we have an opportunity is the biggest thing here. There's a clear road that we can take and that the House has approved right now. They've said we want to put a focus on restaurants, we want to give them relief, and we have a bill that can do that. Not only does it do that, it also does hold people accountable for some of the misactions that we've seen in the past. So we want to do some rewarding of restaurants that are following the rules and doing things correctly, but then we also want to see that relief as well for the consumers to understand that we're there to help them as well. And so we're hoping that we can go in that direction, and we've seen the House unanimously approve that, and now all we're waiting for is the Senate. So it's right there. We can take that path.
And it's been right there for quite some time. You mentioned the employees. You mentioned you're part of the fabric of the community now. So obviously you want to keep your doors open, regardless of how this happens, but this makes it so much easier, I think, for not only you, but so many others.
Absolutely. And if you look at it, the restaurant industry in South Carolina is thriving. If you look across the state, we have become a flagship for restaurants and what you should be doing in the right way, And so if we're going to go out there and we're going to set that standard, we need to see that relief coming from the insurance companies and from our legislators saying we support you as well.
So when this law went into effect a few years ago, and we begin to see restaurants and bars beginning to have to shut their doors. We talked about CWP in the midst of just the other week.
And announcing up on their final day here not long
that
from
if
now.
something does not pass and something does not change, so many more are going to have to say, listen, we can't do this. But you also have the flip side of this where the insurance companies are saying, well, we're not going to do business in South Carolina because we're not recouping our costs. Where's the balance that's in that?
I think it's through responsibility. With the bill that was presented through the House, there are pieces of legislation in there that say if you do all the right things, we will make it easier for you financially, and through this roadblock that we've created in insurance, we can make things a little bit better, and we're able to do that. We can do it through education and getting our staff into training and things like that, and if we do that through the bill, you'll see relief financially. So it's a win-win for everybody there. We need to see some relief quickly though, because if we don't see it now, we're gonna have to wait another 10 months before something will get done. And for us small business owners, 10 months, maybe 10 years. We don't have that time right now.
We'll have more of this on a Connected to Capitol Extra. Make sure you catch it at WACH.com.
Next here, up here on Connect to the Capitol, we're talking about a measure that's in play right now at the State House. Senator Brian Adams has introduced this. It gives law enforcement some more teeth to keep all of us safe. You and I were talking before the segment, though. It really can help in terms of domestic issues, domestic violence, which we know, Catherine, is a problem in our state.
It absolutely is. Now, this bill that you've introduced, it could make a real difference when it comes to domestic homicide. Is that right?
That is correct. And even before that, it can help out. So, and thanks for having me so I can explain this, but what it does, we're the last state that doesn't have a strangulation law in place. And what it does, it will give law enforcement a tool for when a spouse has been strangled and you can't see the physical abuse because of the way it is. And it doesn't take much force to create damage to the throat and or stop the oxygen going to the brain, and it can create brain tissue injuries, and you can actually get injured from it, and you might not perish or have issues from it for maybe a year later. So it's important we put things like this in place so law enforcement has those tools to hold people accountable.
You bring a unique perspective to this particular situation, having an extensive law enforcement background. You've gone to these scenes where it might look like nothing has happened.
That's right.
But you maybe knew in your gut something had. This would help in those situations.
Exactly right, yes. And it gives the silent victim who are afraid to say something the ability for law enforcement to kind of intervene and gather evidence and work towards those charges to hold their spouse accountable. And that's really important too, because sometimes they're afraid to say anything, and so they don't. And if we can work towards that, and if we can see an injury and we can get those x-rays and the doctors show us, say, hey, this is what, then we can pursue those charges and hold them accountable.
That's wonderful. Now, it looks like so far there's strong bipartisan support for this bill, but is law enforcement, are lawyers ready to enforce what this bill would accomplish? I
think they're ready for it. I think it'll help them out. There'll be a learning curve in there to understand exactly what it does and how it can be used. But I think, listen, attorneys and law enforcement we're smart. They'll be able to get some training on it and be able to apply it pretty recently after it passes.
And how many people do you think this might affect every year here in South Carolina?
I couldn't tell you an exact number, but I can tell you it will help several hundred people that are stuck in these abusive relationships.
Wow.
We've seen a lot of effort, maybe in the last decade or so. I'd say that's a ballpark figure, obviously, but commitment to strengthening our domestic violence laws in this state. This is just another prong of that.
Just another piece of it.
Yeah.
And we were talking earlier about domestic violence, and about 10 to 12 years ago, domestic violence changed to where the victim, even if they changed their mind, law enforcement can continue on to charge based on evidence. That's why this is just as important, because it does give that other piece to build on that so they can pursue charges.
Which is so important, because so often in these abuse, domestic violence situations, you see people being pressured by the perpetrator, by their families even sometimes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that does. Sometimes the families intervene and you know, they get wrapped up into the middle of their private situation, and before you know it, they've talked them out of pursuing or following up with things, and or even threatened to a point where they say, I'm not going to pursue anything. So that's why it's so important that law enforcement has these tools so they can protect those that aren't able to speak up for themselves.
Important issue. Can save lives. So the work you're doing.
Absolutely.
So very important.
God bless you.
You're going to have a much more extended conversation with the Senator Adams in a Connected Capital Extra. You can see that at WACH.com.
When you're dealing with a case in which there could be an actual child being harmed, an actual child being abused, time is of the essence.
Cutting the red tape when it comes to tracking down online predators. And we're talking about predators targeting children, young people, vulnerable people, abusive materials, sexual materials in nature. This is important stuff. It seems like a no-brainer that it would have passed by now. At stake here is investigators in our state want an easier way to subpoena IP address information about people that they find could potentially be threats online, but they got to go through the feds to get that information. It can take a long time.
A really long time.
While that clock is ticking, more crimes can be committed.
Exactly, and you have more victims potentially in that process just because of the red tape, just because of that time that it takes to get those records. We all have the IP addresses that we can be tracked, and so the information is out there. It's just that question of how long it'll take. And so our Attorney General leading the way on this. We did that Connect to the Capitol Extra a few weeks ago, discussing it with him, and it's just about keeping predators out of our state, putting fear into the hearts of people who want to do harm to our state's children.
Absolutely. absolutely.
And I think that's the place where, quick segue over to the fact that we now have a new U.S. attorney.
We do, Brian
Sterling, who has left the Department of Corrections. So there's at least a level of connection point that's there. But there needs to be, as Catherine was saying, there needs to be an easier conduit for us to be able to take care of these issues. Brian Sterling did a fantastic job at the Department of Corrections. He's now going to be leading the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I think what you see with that level of leadership, we hope, is going to at least inspire some change in the law to take place, because right now you've got bills, as we've been talking about already today, stuck in either chamber trying to get through. So it's going to be interesting to see how big the mad rush is going to be next week in the last 3 days of the legislative calendar.
And you mentioned Brian Sterling there. A longtime servant of this state, very well respected, not only here in South Carolina, but all around the country for his work in the prison system, helping reduce the recidivism rate here in South Carolina. One of the best when it comes to those rates in this country. A lot of people use his methods as a model. So we actually applaud him for being appointed there for a U.S. attorney, a guy I've known for quite some time, and certainly admire the work that he does.
Yeah, absolutely. And I see such potential for synergy there between the Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney, because we have this this dedication to righting the wrongs, preventing the wrongs, to the justice, and also the recidivism rate, as you pointed out, to make sure that when something does happen, when we catch one of those bad guys, that they don't keep doing it.
Yeah, it's a firm message being sent. Another thing we want to talk about before we get out of here this week, Limestone University, going to have to shut its doors. On its surface, of course, an education option closing, it's disappointing. Students left in limbo, but we did learn just a few days ago that Coker University is willing to take on those students and let them pick up where they left off, even help them with some of their funding. But this is disappointing. They needed to come up with $6 million seemingly overnight. Couldn't do it.
Yeah,
just to keep the doors open until September.
Right.
Couldn't do it.
They had a couple weeks to do it, to get the $6 million. They got about $2.1 million. But this is a university that was founded back in 1845, Christian college, doing such good work. And it's just such a loss for the people of South Carolina that we won't have that educational option for our kids.
Private university, but this could have an impact on other things in the state.
It does have an impact on charter schools in South Carolina. There are charter school authorizers. Part of the legislation that passed several years ago allowed universities to be set up as authorizers for charter schools. So you now have a handful of schools that were part of the Limestone Charter Organization that are now going to either have to go to one of 2 or 3 other authorizers in the state. That's a ripple effect. That's a sideline piece, because if Limestone's not there, they can no longer have an authorizing agency. So those schools are now going to be somewhat in limbo as well, and hopefully something can get addressed with that between the charter school systems that are across the state.
It cascades down.
It does.
It does. We're hitting a lot of topics this week because we know that there's a lot left on the table that needs to be done.
It's a roundup.
Another thing that we want to get in, expanded parental leave. That's another thing that's out there. It's been talked about for quite some time, and people certainly happy about this fact.
Absolutely. We saw the House pass a bill to expand paid parental leave for state employees, school employees, all of our state workers. And this is such a win for work-life balance, pro-life, pro-family policy. We just applaud our lawmakers for getting this done.
Yeah, they got it done, but they got a lot more to do. So let's take a quick look at the week ahead, the final week ahead, Marcus. If we could see that graphic of, 3 work days left in the session. That's what we know. We do know that they're going to come back and probably finish off the budget compromise at a later date. Casino gambling, which we mentioned in segment 1, that's going to be taken up on Tuesday. Likely we'll get through the House. The last one, big question mark there. 3 state health agencies, a movement to combine them. We've seen a lot of consolidation, or even breaking up, rather not consolidation, but breaking apart of some mega agencies as well.
This is like the next round of the reconstruction of state government here. And so you had the Department of Health and the Department of Environment split, so there is no more DHEC anymore.
Used to be DHEC,
So now you have multiple health agencies, disabilities and special needs, DEOTUS, and several others that are now trying to get combined into one. So the bill is S2. It was the second bill that the Senate put out this year. It's just been kind of languishing there for a while. And so the question is, are they going to get that done, or do we still live in this limbo over the next basically 8 or 9 months until the legislature comes back, because if they don't put it in the sine die resolution, which is the things that the House and Senate agree to when they're leaving, that we can come back and we can deal with these other issues like the budget, the governor's vetoes and things like that, then it's going to be a while until that's taken care of.
Yeah, limbo. It's been a word we've used quite a bit
Yeah.
over the last few months as we talk about this, and a lot of things about to get out of limbo. We also heard, Chris Fitz from the Hollow talking about being left in limbo until 2026 if there isn't some type of liquor liability reform plan that gets through. It could mean the difference between keeping the business open for a lot of people and closing it down if those rates continue to be
You think
sky
about
high.
tens of thousands of dollars. If we go out to a restaurant afterwards, or you go to a restaurant here this Sunday, and you're sitting there thinking about the fact that if alcohol is sold after 5 o'clock, they're paying $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month just to keep their business open.
Yeah, that's amazing. So the bottom line here is that we heard it from A.G. Wilson on that online predator proposal, but it goes across the board for a lot of things. If you see something out there, I think that you folks watching, impacts your life, your bottom line, your community, call your lawmaker. Tell them what you're thinking.
That's true, and we've seen these themes kind of reverberating through the session this year, this pro-business, pro-competitiveness, pro-family, pro-child, all these different themes, but all of them require one thing, and that's the voter.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's where your involvement is so vitally important, and why you watch this show. And we want to make sure that you're understanding what's happening not only with the legislation, but the way that you can get involved with that, because here's the thing about it. You pick up the phone and make a phone call, or you send a letter, or you send a note to a legislator. That has a huge impact. And that's the reason why we want to make sure that we're here to help you understand what's happening.
And our lawmakers know that if one person makes a phone call, sends a letter, shows up in person even, that there are hundreds, if not thousands more people who feel the same way and just didn't get a chance to get out there.
Exactly. If you're not connected with us on Facebook, you can catch all the previous episodes. All of our Connect to the Capitol extras are there, and at WACH.com.
And we will see you again next week when we get you connected to the Capitol after what's going to be a mad dash to the finish line. We'll see you in a week.